the galaxy had already surrendered. For centuries, the Vorkal dominion swept across the stars like an unstoppable plague. Empires crumbled, their fleets reduced to slag. Cities burned beneath orbital bombardments, and entire planets were stripped bare of life. To the Dominion it wasn't conquest, it was inevitability. Every world that stood against them became another scar in their ever-expanding territory. Civilizations older and stronger than humanity had fallen with barely a cry. The proud Tar Republic, gone in 3 days. The crystalline Arivans, whose war fleets once rivaled suns, silenced in a single week. Even the Council of Iron, rulers of 1,000 worlds, had been erased with clinical precision. No resistance had lasted longer than a battle. And so, when their fleets turned toward the Sol system, the galaxy whispered in mourning. Humanity was young, untested, fragile. To many, Earth's fall was already written in the stars. The Dominion expected another easy victory. But when their vanguard fleet emerged from hyperspace, they did not find a groveling world begging for mercy. They did not see evacuation ships scattering like frightened insects. No, their sensors locked onto a single warship, alone at the edge of the system. The UNS Aegis. To the Dominion it was laughable. A single vessel? Against them? The Vorkal commander, High Marshal Dravkesh, broadcast his derision across the void. One ship. Humanity sends one ship to defend their world? Very well. We shall burn it first, let their people watch as their pride shatters before we consume them. The Dominion fleet moved in with contemptuous ease. Hundreds of cruisers and carriers spread like a metal storm. But the Aegis did not retreat. On the bridge of the warship, Captain Mara Vey stood tall, her hands clasped behind her back. She was not old by any measure, 42, with sharp eyes that had seen too much of war already, but she carried herself with the weight of history. Her crew, only 800 souls, sat in silence as the Dominion swarm approached. Every screen showed the same thing: they were outnumbered, outgunned, hopeless. Status, she said, her voice calm, steady. Shields charged. Weapons primed. The Dominion is hailing again, ma'am. Let them speak. The face of Dravkesh appeared, reptilian, armored, sneering. Captain of the human vessel, he hissed. You stand before the Dominion. Surrender, and we may grant your species the mercy of servitude. Resist, and your homeworld burns. Choose wisely. Mara Vey smiled, not with amusement but with the hard steel of a predator. Marshal, she said evenly, the galaxy has rolled over for you too long. You'll find humanity less accommodating. Then she cut the transmission. The first wave of Dominion cruisers surged forward, weapons primed. Plasma lances spat across the void, tearing at space itself. The Aegis seemed impossibly small against the onslaught. And then it vanished. The Dominion ships fired into empty space, confused, recalibrating. Cloaking was not unknown in the galaxy, but the humans had refined it into something else entirely. The Aegis shimmered back into existence inside the formation of enemy ships, its hull bristling with newly developed weapons. Fire, Mara said simply. The warship roared. From its flanks erupted warp lances, weapons that bent space itself into spears of annihilation. Entire Dominion cruisers were torn in half, collapsing into glowing wreckage before their crews even registered the attack. The Aegis wheeled, cannons swiveling, shredding carrier after carrier in a storm of railgun fire accelerated to relativistic speeds. For the first time in centuries, the Vorkal lost ships faster than they could react. On his flagship, Dravkesh stared in disbelief. This is impossible. One vessel cannot. But his words were drowned out as another detonation filled the void. The Dominion commander ordered more ships forward, flooding the battlefield with fighters and bombers. The swarm closed in, blotting out the stars. But humanity had not built the Aegis to fight fair battles. Deploy the Aegis protocol, Mara ordered. The warship's hull split open like the wings of some vast predator, releasing hundreds of autonomous drones. Unlike the Dominion's fighters, these were not piloted. They were extensions of the Aegis's own AI, an intelligence cold, calculating, and merciless. The drones moved as if they were one being, weaving through enemy fire with inhuman precision. Swarms of Vorkal fighters disintegrated as the drones detonated microsingularity charges in their midst. The crew of the Aegis did not cheer. There was no room for triumph, only grim determination. Hour after hour the battle raged. The Dominion's confidence began to crack. For the first time in their campaign of endless conquest, their ships faltered. Entire wings broke formation. The name of the human warship spread through their comms like wildfire, the Aegis. A curse. A nightmare. And then, silence. What remained of the Dominion's fleet retreated, limping into hyperspace. They had come with arrogance and overwhelming force. They left with wreckage trailing behind them, their pride shattered. On the bridge, the crew of the Aegis sat in stunned silence. The battlefield was littered with the glowing husks of Dominion vessels, fragments spinning like dying stars. Mara Vey let out a slow breath. She knew this was not the end. The Dominion would return with more ships, more fury. But for the first time in galactic history, their advance had been stopped. The comms officer turned to her. "Ma'am, incoming transmissions. Not from the Dominion. From everywhere. Other worlds. Colonies. Even species we thought extinct. They're asking for us. For humanity. They're asking if the Aegis will fight for them too." Mara closed her eyes, the weight of destiny settling on her shoulders. One ship, one stand had ignited something greater than survival. It had given the galaxy hope. She opened her eyes, voice firm. "Send a message. Tell them humanity stands with them. Tell them the Dominion can bleed." The crew straightened, their exhaustion fading beneath a new fire. For the first time in an age of conquest, the galaxy did not bow. It rose. And at the heart of that rising stood a single warship, defiant against the darkness. The Aegis. The lone bastion. The stars had grown silent. One by one, the beacons of civilization winked out as the Zorith Empire marched across the galaxy. They left nothing but ruin in their wake. Entire systems were erased, their histories reduced to ash. Survivors whispered of fleets so vast they blotted out suns, of ships that cracked worlds apart like fruit beneath a hammer. And through the endless dark, their message was always the same: kneel or perish. Most knelt. Those who did not were never heard from again. When the Zorith turned their gaze upon humanity, the galaxy expected Earth to follow the same fate. A species barely out of its cradle, untested in the true scale of galactic war, what chance could they possibly have? But humanity had one weapon the Zorith had never faced before. The UNS Invictus. The warship was a beast of steel and fire, humanity's crown jewel. Forged in the desperate years when humanity first learned of alien wars, she was built not as a vessel of exploration but as a fortress, an ark of vengeance. Longer than any skyscraper, bristling with cannons that could gut a battleship in seconds, her hull gleamed black against the stars. And at her helm stood Captain Elias Ward. Ward was no stranger to loss. He had fought in the early skirmishes with alien raiders, had seen colonies burned, had carried the bodies of his own crew back to Earth. In those days he had sworn an oath: Earth will never kneel. Not while I draw breath. Now, as the Zorith Armada surged toward the Sol system, that oath was all that stood between humanity and extinction. The bridge of the Invictus hummed with tension. Officers sat rigid in their chairs, their faces pale as they watched the tactical display. Dozens, no hundreds, of Zorith warships appeared, their engines burning like a wall of fire across the void. "Contact in 6 minutes," reported the navigator. "They've formed a spearhead formation. Looks like they mean to cut straight through to Earth." Ward stood at the center, his hands clasped behind his back. His voice when it came was calm. "Good. Let them come." The crew glanced at him, searching his face for doubt. They found none. Ward's eyes were cold steel, his expression carved from stone. He had known this moment was coming. The Zorith were not a storm to be weathered, they were a tide to be broken. And the Invictus would be the rock. The enemy hailed them. On the screen appeared a Zorith overlord, his armor shimmering like molten gold, his eyes burning with contempt. "Human captain," the alien rumbled, "you dare oppose us with one ship? Lay down your arms and surrender. Your people will serve the Empire. Resist and your world dies screaming." Ward didn't blink. "I've heard your threats," he said evenly. "I've seen the ashes you leave behind. But I swore an oath long ago, that humanity will never bow to tyrants like you. So take your fleet, and try us." Then he cut the channel. The Zorith fleet surged forward. Cannons lit up the void, streaks of plasma lancing toward the lone human warship. The Invictus rolled, shields flaring as the first salvo slammed into her hull. "Shields holding," called the tactical officer. Ward's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Return fire." The Invictus roared. Mass drivers thundered, hurling slugs the size of tanks at a fraction of light speed. Plasma torpedoes streaked outward in glowing arcs. And from deep within her core, the ship unleashed her deadliest weapon, the Helios Array, a spinal cannon that condensed a miniature sun into a beam of pure annihilation. The first shot tore through 3 Zorith cruisers, reducing them to molten wreckage. The galaxy's predators had expected a lamb. What they found was a lion. The battle raged. Wave after wave of Zorith ships hammered the Invictus, their numbers overwhelming. Each hit rocked the warship, consoles sparking, alarms screaming. But every time the enemy struck, Ward struck back harder. Target their carriers. Cut their fighter wings in half. Deploy drone squadrons. Flank them. Helios array, fire at will. The crew obeyed without hesitation, their fear burning away under their captain's command. They fought not just with weapons but with fury, with the knowledge that behind them lay Earth, their families, their future. And slowly, impossibly, the Zorith advance began to falter. Across the galaxy, news spread faster than light. Pirate dens, refugee colonies, scattered remnants of fallen civilizations, all of them tuned into the desperate battle at Sol. And what they saw was impossible. One ship, one human ship, standing against an empire that had broken 1,000 worlds. Whispers spread into roars. If the humans could fight, if they could stand, then maybe the Zorith were not invincible. Maybe the galaxy had a chance. The Invictus was no longer just a warship. It was a symbol. But symbols came at a cost. After hours of relentless battle, the Invictus was bleeding. Fires raged in her lower decks. Hull plating was shredded. Over 200 crew were dead and more were wounded. On the bridge, Ward stood unbowed, blood trickling from a cut on his brow. The tactical display showed wave after wave still coming. "Captain," whispered his first officer, "we can't win this. Not against so many." Ward's jaw tightened. His oath burned in his chest. He thought of Earth, of its oceans and forests, of its cities shining against the night. He thought of his oath, carved into his very soul. "We don't need to win," he said softly. "We just need to show them we'll never kneel." With the last reserves of power, Ward ordered the Invictus forward, straight into the heart of the Zorith fleet. It was madness. It was suicide. It was defiance. The warship's engines screamed as it plunged into the enemy formation. Cannons fired at point-blank range, tearing battleships apart. The Helios array unleashed one final blast, carving a path of fire through the swarm. The Zorith, unaccustomed to prey that fought back, faltered. Entire squadrons broke formation. For the first time, the unstoppable tide recoiled. And in that moment, across the galaxy, hope was reborn. Hours later, the surviving Zorith ships retreated, limping into hyperspace. They had come to crush humanity in a single blow. Instead, they had been bloodied, humiliated, by one warship and one captain who refused to bow. On the bridge of the battered Invictus, silence reigned. The stars outside were littered with wreckage, glowing embers of fallen giants. Ward stood tall, though his uniform was torn, his face streaked with soot. He looked at his surviving crew, tired, wounded, but alive. "Send a message," he said quietly, "to every world that still listens. Tell them humanity stands. Tell them the Zorith can be fought. And tell them," he paused, eyes hard as iron, "tell them we will never kneel." The oath had been kept. And from that day forward, the galaxy whispered a new name with awe and defiance. The Invictus. The ship that taught the galaxy to rise. The galaxy had no answer to the Kryn swarm. They were not an empire. They were not conquerors. They were hunger given form, billions of chitinous bodies bound together in a hive mind that knew no fear, no retreat, no mercy. They consumed everything in their path. Planets, fleets, cities, even the very technology of their prey. What they absorbed, they made their own. World after world fell screaming. The proudest civilizations of the Orion Arm became nothing but fodder for the swarm. Resistance was swallowed in weeks. Refugees fled across the stars, but the swarm always followed, endless and unrelenting. And then their countless fleets turned toward Sol. The galaxy despaired. If the swarm devoured Earth, humanity's ingenuity and technology would fuel their plague. No one believed the humans could stand. No one, except humanity itself. For they had built a weapon unlike any other. The HMS Valiant. The Valiant was not the largest ship in existence, nor the most advanced. But it had been forged with a singular purpose: to fight the swarm. Every weapon, every system, every circuit had been designed with one enemy in mind. Its hull bristled with point-defense cannons, plasma projectors, railguns, and missile bays. Its engines could push it harder than any predator expected. And her crew, every one of them carried the same oath. No colony, no family, no soul will be abandoned to the swarm. At their head stood Commander Juno Cade. Cade was not a legend. Not yet. She was a soldier forged in fire, a woman who had seen the swarm devour frontier worlds and vowed that humanity would never meet the same fate. Her voice was steady, her gaze unflinching. Where others saw terror, she saw an enemy to be killed. When the Kryn arrived in the Sol system, they came as they always did, endless. Hive ships the size of moons, swarms of biofighters blotting out the stars, tendrils of living metal weaving across space like predators' claws. Their chittering voices filled the comms. Another world. Another feast. But at the system's edge, a single warship waited. The Valiant. The swarm laughed, if such creatures could laugh. One ship. One fragile vessel against the hunger of infinity? Cade's reply was a whisper carried across the stars. We are humanity. We don't run. We don't kneel. Come then. Let's see if you can swallow us whole. The first wave struck. Thousands of biofighters screeched through the void, spitting acid and plasma, tearing at the Valiant's shields. The ship rocked under the assault, but her point defense grid roared to life. Cannons tracked with surgical precision, shredding the swarm in storms of fire. Railguns barked, turning organic cruisers into tumbling corpses of flesh and metal. Still they came. Cade stood tall on the bridge, her voice steady. Bring us in close. Right into their formation. The helmsman hesitated only a second, then obeyed. The Valiant plunged into the swarm like a spear, her hull blazing with weapons. Plasma lances burned holes through hive ships. Missile salvos scattered fighters like insects before a flame. Everywhere the Valiant bled, but she refused to die. The Kryn hive mind hissed in frustration. They had expected fear, retreat, submission. Instead, this lone warship fought with the fury of 1,000. Their collective voice echoed across space. You are prey. Why do you resist? Cade's eyes narrowed. Her reply was a growl. Because we are human. And prey bites back. The battle raged for hours. The Valiant executed ambushes the swarm had never seen before, luring them into minefields, tricking them into crossfire, detonating fusion warheads at point-blank range. The crew fought like demons, bloodied and exhausted, but unbroken. One by one, hive ships began to fall. Not many, but enough. Enough to make the swarm pause. Enough to show them that hunger could be denied. And across the galaxy, desperate civilizations watched. They had hidden, cowered, surrendered to despair. But as they tuned into the human transmissions, raw feeds of the battle, they saw a single warship standing defiant against the endless plague. They saw the impossible. Hope spread like wildfire. But victory was far from certain. The Valiant was burning. Fires raged in her lower decks. Casualty reports scrolled endlessly across the displays. The ship's AI warned that structural collapse was imminent. On the bridge, smoke filled the air. Officers shouted over sparking consoles. Commander, we can't hold much longer. Cade looked out at the battlefield, at the endless tide still surging. Her face was calm, but her heart hammered. She thought of the colonies, of the people hiding in bunkers, praying for salvation. She thought of Earth, her home, watching this battle with bated breath. And she remembered the oath she had taken. Her voice cut through the chaos, clear and sharp. We will hold. Not because we can win, but because humanity must show the galaxy what it means to stand. The crew straightened. The despair in their eyes hardened into fire. The Valiant roared one last time. Engines flared as she drove straight into the heart of the swarm. Weapons blazed in every direction, tearing hive ships apart in suicidal fury. Drones launched in waves, detonating antimatter charges inside the enemy's guts. The ship bled, screamed, but refused to fall. The Kryn recoiled. For the first time in their endless advance, they felt something alien to their hive mind. Not fear, not yet, but something close. Doubt. If one warship could do this, what would happen when humanity sent fleets? Finally, after hours of carnage, the swarm retreated. Not destroyed, not beaten, but stalled. Their endless tide had broken against one ship and one commander who refused to bow. Silence fell over the battlefield. The stars were littered with wreckage, burning husks of hive ships, drifting carcasses of alien monsters. The Valiant floated at the center, broken but alive, her engines still burning. On the bridge, the crew sat in stunned quiet. They had survived. Against all odds, they had survived. Commander Juno Cade stood tall, her uniform torn, her face streaked with blood and soot. She looked at her battered crew and spoke softly, but with iron in her voice. Send this to every colony, every fleet, every soul still listening. The swarm can be stopped. Humanity stood and humanity endures. We will fight. And we will not be devoured. The crew nodded, tears in their eyes, fire in their hearts. And across the galaxy, billions heard the message. The Valiant was no longer just a ship. It was a roar in the darkness. A promise that the swarm would not consume everything. It was the warship that defied hunger itself. It was the warship that roared.